Absolutely. Community benefits agreement for the Lakeside Development Project.
Yes.
Absolutely. Charter school expansion and the war.
Absolutely what?
Absolutely, yes. Charter school expansion and award.
Because I've spoken with many residents that like the choice between neighborhood schools and charter schools, I would say yes.
Yes to charter schools expansion.
I would say at this point, not unless there's been an examination of how our neighborhood schools are working.
Again, these are weighted issues, so we do want to allow for there to be commentary, but we would like for you to speak into the affirmative as to whether you are in support or not, or to state that you need to do further examination of the topic. Whether or not there would be a moratorium on tips for the City of Chicago in the 7th Ward.
No.
No.
Special service areas, SSAs for the 7th Ward. Additional. No, whether or not we should have additional SSAs for the 7th Ward.
I spent a lot of time over the past 2 years straightening out a lot of problems with the SSA that currently exists. And until that SSA is up and running and functioning in the way that it should, no. But once it is, then I am looking at the time for expansion, the expansion for SSA on that district.
That concludes rapid fire.
We're now going to, thank you so much for that. We're now going to transition into our questions from each of you. Now keep in mind, we will not, by any means possible, be able to answer all the questions that were submitted. We're going to do this in a fair process, which allows each of the candidates to pull their own questions, so they'll be picking their own poison. So we now have the basket coming forward. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the question in which they draw, and we will have the question read, as well as if you indicated your name. We'll reveal that as well.
Begin.
Yellow first instead of
Okay, this question is for Alderman Holmes. You were appointed by the mayor to serve as the 7th Ward Alderman. What role did you play in the 7th Ward prior to your appointment? That's one. Why didn't you run for Alderman during the post-election? Okay. Let's just do it first while I make out the rest of this penmanship.
So first of all, before I was appointed alderman, in the 7th Ward particularly, number one, I served as a president of my condo association. And number two, I ran and won a seat as community representative on the local school council for Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Padilla Academy, which is located on 75th and South Shore. And most people always ask, like, you don't have any kids, like, why would you run for school council? And the reason why I did it was because of the fact that I come home every day and I see all these kids walking in the neighborhood. And for me, it's about making sure that the children in my community where I live are getting a high quality education, and Powell is a level 1+ school.
Thank you so much. We have some doctors in the room because this penmanship, I know you already know, is quite extravagant. Okay, this question is for Greg. What would you do to ensure that landlords are held accountable and responsible for their properties and maintenance and physical upkeep?
So I've actually touched on a little bit of that when I addressed the CHA. So to reiterate that, for those programs, for those structures that are investor owned, that are rented out to Section 8 holders, work with CHA to hold the investors as well as the tenants accountable for their behaviors and upkeep of the property. One of the things that I've spoken about was to try to put a beautification ordinance in place where would hold property owners, investors, accountable for the upkeep of their property. We have a lot of real property throughout the ward that are owned by investors. So, as a beautification effort, we don't want them to go away back to the suburbs or wherever and not to do anything about the property. We want to hold them accountable, keep the grass cut, keep the roof done, maintenance, preventive maintenance, and once again, be responsible for the behaviors of the tenants. Because in certain neighborhoods throughout the 7th Ward, you have drug activity in certain homes where they are renting. That needs to be addressed. We have people selling cigarettes, loose cigarettes out. That activity has to be addressed. If that ordinance is effective, we effectively minimize as well as ultimately stop those type of activities by holding the investors, the banks, and everybody else accountable for their property.
Thank you. Next question for Alderman Holmes. What are your plans for bringing in more businesses to the 7th Ward, such as major stores and a youth center?
Well, number one, we do have a youth center, the Rebecca Crown Center, and last year we were able to work with People's Gas to get to get that facility updated. And so that's something I'm very proud of that we're doing. We all want more youth centers across the ward and across the entire city, but what we have to do is build the capacity of the 7th Ward to be able to handle that. When we think about what we have here in terms of 501c3s, we really don't have that many. And you really need a 501c3 in order to leverage funding for some of these things that we want in our neighborhoods. What was the other question?
Your plan to bring in business?
Oh yeah, businesses. Okay. So, I have this fight every single day of my life and every single day since I've been living here. When I first moved here, like I said, I chose here. And I tried to just shop in the 7th Ward, and I found myself only having options, Dominick's and Sears, and both of those options are gone now. So it's been a struggle. We live in an area of the city that has a $400 million retail gap. So how I'm trying to address that is I'm bringing retailers and investors to the table, and I'm bringing the community to the table. Because I think we have to hear what they're saying, and they have to hear what we're saying in terms of what we need and what we want, and how we spend our money. It's our buying power that allows these companies to exist. And so when we recognize that it's our buying power, we have the bigger stake, and it's a matter of making investors and retailers appreciate that. I could not shop all day at the store on 76 and Coles, but if everybody else in the room is going there, they're going to stay in business. And so it's about all of us being vigilant in terms of making sure that we are addressing our buying power.
Next question for Mr. Mitchell. Do you believe the city government should negotiate with ASME to solve the city's pension funding issue?
Because of the ramifications of any changes that the city would make toward the employees or people employees of people that's part of ASPEN, they would have to, in good faith, negotiate any changes, any alterations in their current agreement. It's about fairness. If there's an agreement on the table, it's not fair to just change things without a fair negotiation. So the city should.
Okay, and follow up to that, both of you, given the pension crisis that we're facing as a city and the ongoing conversations about how we will address the budgetary crisis, what are your plans and what's your position on a property tax increase? Both of you, 1 minute.
A property tax increase should not be the first or the only alternative to address the issue. As a matter of fact, I think it should be the last. But as Alderman, which would represent my constituency, when I'm representing them down in City Hall, I would definitely make it known that this is not one of the avenues that we would like to take. However, it did come down to that, I would be responsible to talk to my constituency and get their feedback and also represent them down in City Hall. But we need to come up with other that's sustainable, that's reoccurring, and that's effective. Ideas that I have on the table, we're giving a lot of subsidies to corporations. Now, I'm all in favor of corporations, getting corporations to relocate to the city of Chicago. I love it. But are we giving them too much to relocate? Are we leaving too much on the table? We should look at that more in depth and see, if we're giving somebody hypothetically numbers, you're giving them $10 million over 5 years, maybe we should give $10 million over 10 years. It frees up money for that.
Thank you. Same question, Alderman Holmes. To address the budgetary crisis and the pension crisis that we face, what is your position on the property tax increase and other solutions to address the budget?
Well, one of the big things that I've been fighting for, not only just as alderman, just as always being a government employee, is finding ways to make government more efficient. I always tell the story that, when I started working at IDOT, they didn't have voicemail, they still had the rotary dial phones, and so we have to find those efficiencies in how we operate as a governmental body. So that would be first. I think when we look at, first of all, and as a person who is vested in the state of Illinois system, we're going to have to look at ways to address the pension crisis in a variety of revenue increasing ways. And so I won't say a property tax is going to definitely happen. I can't speak to that because I don't know if that's the case. But there are going to be shared sacrifices across the board in order to make sure that we uphold the constitutional right for folks to get a government pension.
Thank you so much. This will be our final set of questions from the audience, and then we will transition to questions that you present to one another, and then your closing statements. Our next question is to Alderman Holmes. Have you changed your opposition to a community benefits agreement relating to lakeside development?
I have always been in favor of a community benefits agreement. I think that what everyone has to understand is, I actually was meeting with one of the former candidates, and she mentioned the community benefits agreement. And I said, she said, well, you're not in favor of that one. And I'm like, when you have an agreement come before you, if someone gives you a document, are you just going to sign it? Are you going to read it? Are you going to do some research, find out how it's been implemented in other places, find out how it's been implemented in the city? Are you going to do that? And, she was taken aback because, I think when we talk about an agreement, you have people coming to the table to agree to a set of terms. And you want to make sure that everyone at the table agrees to those terms. I've said this from the start of my life and being alderman is that, good policy doesn't come from consensus. Good policy comes from making sure that everyone is at the table and that you're making something that is going to be the best for everybody around. So it's not just about the politics of it, it's about the policy of it. And so, with the community benefits agreement, actually my current stance is that I think the development is so far off, 20, 30 years. And there are things that are going to happen over that course of 20 or 30 years. And I think that every component that happens at Lakeside should have a community benefits agreement. You can't just put a community benefits agreement in place for something that's going to happen 30 years from now because there are a lot of things that have changed 30 years from now. But every project that happens, there should be a community benefits agreement for every project that happens at Lakeside, not just for the Lakeside development one-shot deal.
Okay, our last question from the audience is for Greg. What would you do to bridge the disconnect between the southern and northern portions of the ward?
Considering I'm from the most southern end of the ward, the bridging of the gap starts with me. And I bring